Let us finish this. I entrust this blade to you once more. This ends now!
Consider yourself finished! I'll burn it all!
I did not expect Tales of Arise to be so good, but then again, I had a feeling it would be. Of course, it comes with the big booby anime girl, which is right up my alley, of course. It features an exquisite art style, painting the grim world in a romanticized light and teasing a roller coaster romance between the protagonist and his waifu-to-be, which I love because romance is my favorite genre. I think it's because I appreciate the relationships between characters the most out of all of the elements in a story, especially the kind that feel human with actual internal motivations driving them forward, instead of some arbitrary plot device pulling the strings like most narratives use, such as the damsel in distress needing escorting across international date lines that insist on being an annoying teenager on the trip back home. I'm kidding, of course. I love everything about Resident Evil 4 and its characters because they do feel real and like they're fighting to prove something to quiet that doubt from within, like the heroes of Tales. Of course, Tales of Arise does have annoying teenagers. The kind with the tired tsundere anime trope personality type of initial asshats psychoanalyzed nearly to death across their arcs, at which point the therapy reveals some deep tragedy that affected them in such a way that they must hide their true feelings from one another, out of fear of rejection, even when it becomes painfully obvious to the audience that they're all extra horny and they just want to kiss. Tales of Arise teases us with a true love romance from the opening anime montage, which frames the story as an epic tale of retribution and rebellion, and thankfully we eventually do get that kiss that we all desired, even if the game's story never quite reaches the Kiwami nature of the lofty heights promised by those gorgeous animation scenes. Fortunately, I am not here to talk all about anime storylines, because if you've seen one, you've sort of seen them all. I'm here to talk instead about the real reason Tales is rising. That combat. Tales is apparently one of the most popular and long-running game series in Japan, and like most anime games, they've flown under the radar in the West. Arise, with an upgraded physics engine and art budget, is easily the most accessible game in the series to date, it would seem to me, even if this is my first game that I played in the dozen-plus main entries. Tales is considered supposedly as important to the Japanese RPG scene as a franchise like Final Fantasy, which people keep raving about but I've never gotten into. I'm more of a Kingdom Hearts person myself, even though I haven't played those games in almost 2 decades now. At the time, the idea of a hack-and-slash title with RPG mechanics was a true innovation, so when I heard that Tales was similar in style, I thought it sounded very interesting. Now it looks like Tales was not only one of the first to try that formula out, they might have done it the best. There's a ton of Tales games, each using the linear motion battle system, a party-based RPG format where you can actually switch and fully control characters on the fly, allowing for enormous permutations of synergized chain combos wildly strewn together in a tandem, with the AI to create a beautiful and punishing exclamation point to every battle. As the name implies, Arise shoots for the peak with its ambition. Everyone is competing for the crown shared by Devil May Cry and Bayonetta, but experimentation is what the industry needs, and Tales of Arise shows itself to be a very inspired and unique twist on the party-based RPGs, and also a worthwhile action game with fantastic hack-and-slash mechanics. The flashiness kind of speaks for itself, and the chaos you can create is also self-evident. The reason that it's unlikely we will ever see another game as good in its genre as Bayonetta or DMC, although Tales is close to being as good, is because those games are very focused around facilitating the most player choice possible and fine-tuning the combat encounters around those possibilities. There is a goal in mind to push the player towards precision while at the same time saying it's a freestyle dance. It's why the new God of War fails to meet the standard set by its predecessors, because it puts combat secondary to the bloated story and cumbersome world design, and because it removes player choice in the jump button in favor of more stringent RPG mechanics, which are half-assed and half-baked. It's stunting in the same way that a game like Sekiro or Bloodborne forces your hand to play the way the developers wanted you to, with little possibility for real improvisation. Those games can still reach a certain level of greatness overall, but they can never have a 10 out of 10 combat because they don't want you to have true freedom. I don't think Tales deserves a 10 out of 10 combat score either, but it's close at peak value given the fact that you can air juggle enemies and train combos on them from all sides and angles, taking a beating from the aggressive AI just as you can dish it out. Tales of Arise does, however, have some slight technical issues and some balancing problems that prevents it from being a solid 10 out of 10. But that's to be expected given the scope of its ambitious real-time connectivity with party members swapping and the RPG underpinnings. Although the difficulty suffers the same issue that almost every RPG does, which is arbitrary difficulty by scaling instead of mechanical complexity, Tales fascinatingly fuses the freedom of choice of action game combat with light RPG building to create a satisfying and addicting experience that remains pleasing to the eye and to the touch. I played Arise on every difficulty setting, finding that hard was the sweet spot for regular enemy encounters, balancing the challenge and expression to create a sense of reward, especially given the modifier that grants bonuses to XP gains for the higher difficulty. But for the boss fights, I think the game can be a bit demanding on the higher difficulties, given the inconsistency of AI party members to actually stay alive and perform. Tales of Arise definitely wants to make it tough on you, given all of the tools that the game gives you at your disposal, such as AI healers and a bevy of support items. You can tinker with the default settings of your AI, and of course in strategic situations, you can swap between them for tactical repositioning or to exploit their affinity advantages against the enemy. But sometimes this leads to the other AI getting confused and just standing around to get one-shot by a big boss move. Tales of Arise has an inherent difficulty curve based on the fact that you only gradually gain new abilities, many of which would be fundamental in games like Devil May Cry, so you only really get into the groove of things towards the end of the game, when you've reached your true form along with the enemies. I think this is all well and good in terms of balancing dynamic gameplay with the interconnected system of grinding the story and combat to unlock the pathways in both respective categories. You fight a secret boss and you unlock a new story arc. You complete a side quest and you unlock a new skill tree. It's a good system. I just think some of the enemy types get repetitive, and for close to 70 unique bosses, many of them function similarly mechanically with some added gimmicks that test your knowledge of how each playable character is designed to counter another enemy system. With only 6 party members, you're never really at a disadvantage because you can always activate the reserve's power-up in a pinch. At the same time, it might be a good thing that you can only get 6 playable characters, 2 of which are just glorified support auto-roll characters. That way, you don't get too overwhelmed with having to decide who is best to play as. 6 characters offers you an impressive variety of answers to combat puzzles, with good balancing to entice you to switch it up every now and then, depending on what's required. With so many difficulty modes and additional modifiers, like the high risk and reward 100% damage increase buff that makes the game more fun and tough fights more manageable, Tales lets you play the game at your own speed and your own strength, putting creativity at the forefront for those who want it, while offering the ability to grind out attrition or break the game completely through the RPG scaling if they so choose. It's for the same reason that Arise maybe isn't the most complex, hardcore hack-and-slash game ever made, because you can always rely on the AI assistance to keep the combos going and the health flowing back. And the special buff moves that, although flashy, serve to trivialize most battles, depending on what difficulty you play. Some could argue that just by abusing the down mechanic by dogpiling the enemy is trivial enough. But the boss fights are usually well designed by matching your numbers on the battlefield and forcing you to micromanage to survive. The combo system works very well, as it's simple and intuitive to input moves with the press of a designated button, and the higher the combo goes, the more damage you deal over time. Though it isn't flawless, nor is it necessarily a display of your impromptu creativity, but it always has the potential to be. Combos are essentially easy to pull off and maintain, and while there is only a slight penalty for spamming the same moves in the form of damage reduction, all attacks landed allow the combo to continue in tandem with any input from the AI. It's not uncommon then to go from 0 to 100 hits in a second's notice. The problem lies in the brief window where you attempt to switch from one character to the next, to sometimes use an in-between move to continue the combo while you regain your stamina or reposition yourself. This seems to be inconsistent in terms of the timing that it takes for the hit to register. Sometimes, during the player character's forced pause, the boost strike will land in time to keep it going, and sometimes not. The enemy can also regain composure from a down state, which can reset the combo to 0, and with a time delay in executing the mystic art, you can also end up missing out on the continuation. Still, the system finds a sweet spot between accessibility and depth, creating a breeding ground for complex combos to be chained together depending on which playstyles you favor to explore. I truly enjoy and admire Tales of Arise's combat, yet I do decry absences of essential gameplay devices like dodge offsets, which Bayonetta invented to solve the fundamental problem in action game design, where once a combo is initiated, you cannot cancel the combo without A, losing the combo, and or B, taking damage in the process. Tails does have one of the most satisfying and fluid dodge moves in such a game, although it, like the art's combo input numbers, is limited to one at a time, and only when no other attack animation is ongoing. This is a flaw I noticed right away, because there's little sense in a game that encourages and incentivizes keeping your combos going as long as possible, to also impose an inherent risk to interrupting your flow in order to keep you from doing so. You constantly need to think a few steps ahead whether or not you should even go for the attack, at the risk of entering into an uncancelable animation that's just going to hurt you more than it hurts the enemy. Someone will make the argument that Tales is designed that way to make the game more tactical, so you can't just spam dodges and attacks without a cooldown, which is kind of an antithetical idea for an action game. But I think it's a missed opportunity for some truly bonkers next level game design. If a mediocre system like the one in Nier Automata can have dodge offsets for a game that isn't even close to being combat oriented like Tales is, then Tales has no excuse for not having it and implementing it to its true potential. I don't think I can give the combat a 10 out of 10 when so much of it relies on scaling, AI assistance curating and limiting the possibilities of direct player agency. And of course there's a contradictory format surrounding the combos paired with the exclusion of dodge offsets when Bayonetta exists and is flawless in terms of its mechanics. Tales of Arise's combat is still excellent, despite an annoying lock-on that forces you to put a pause on the real time and a struggle to select who you actually want to target. And even then it can be hard to actually land an attack directly, given that the enemies, even those with big hitboxes, are constantly jumping about while the targeting is just generally wonky at times. There's also a weird inertia mechanic going on that works against the player sometimes. You can be stuck in the air, locked into an animation with no way to cancel it, and if your aerial attacks miss the enemy, you're just wasting time being rendered sluggish. Not to mention, when you run out of stamina, you're stuck waiting for a second for the cooldown with no possible move but to dodge. With most boss fights, you can't even get them off the ground to really kick it to them. So you end up trying to train together these attacks with big hitboxes that just end up missing the target when standing directly in front of them. It's not as tight as the camera and controls in Devil May Cry 3 that lets you enemy step and pounce all over your opponent. Let's just say that the trash mobs are a Devil May Cry 4 player's dream, because these guys can actually get beat the fuck down as long as you can keep them suspended, depending on the difficulty. This inertia works well for the airtime that the player receives too, because as long as you have a stamina point left available, every action performed in the air will allow you to essentially levitate up there until you get hit or decide to come down. This gives you a strategic advantage, especially against other airborne enemies that you can meet at eye level, or at keeping you safe from enemies that spam AoEs on the ground, with the whole idea being to stay out of harm's way as much as possible as to not distract your healers. Tales does an overall smart job of integrating dynamic verticality into battles, and allowing the tandem skills to work in concert to keep enemies there in a most vulnerable state for you to play with. As I always preach about, it takes two to tango in a combat system, meaning mechanics alone are not enough to make a combat system good. Tales has good enemy and boss variety, which, when supported by the foundations of the mechanics, allows the combat to be something memorable to return to. So what about the encounters and level designs themselves? Tales has a big world to explore in terms of classic dungeon crawling, but in more expansive environments, detailed by many impressive sceneries across eclectic biomes, with resource gathering, insulation, and various unique enemy types abound. Here you can bypass battles altogether by tiptoeing around them, or stay behind with repeat fights to grind for rare drops, which can be increased by consuming items with XP rewards, increasing on higher difficulties depending on how you perform in each battle, making battles as consequential as you want them to be. For example, you will only learn certain new moves by experimenting with the party members inside of battles, so the game certainly finds a way not to force but to encourage learning all 6 characters. There's a good amount of in-game content and New Game Plus for people who want to have a harder experience or easier depending on what you want. There is a bit of an in-game grind, and I wondered how I was able to beat the main game at level 50 and still only be halfway to max rank. But it doesn't end up becoming too nagging, as they have dedicated lineups of optional bosses to help you get there in order and in time. A few features are missing, I thought, compared to Persona 5's dungeon mechanics, which allow you to not only avoid unwanted conflicts through stealth, but also the ability to negotiate with enemies or to ambush them, giving whoever gets the ambush a major advantage to begin the battle. Another issue is the lack of penalty when dying in a fight, outside of mandatory boss fights. You could encounter a strong enemy and lose intentionally to force the enemy to despawn, granting you safe access to the guarded treasure or exit way. I don't necessarily have a problem with this degree of accessibility and lack of gatekeeping. It's a fresh idea, but compared to the sense of importance of every encounter in Persona, which almost turns dungeon crawling into a survival game, Tales makes a lot of its encounters feel potentially inconsequential, almost like the player is being babied by the developer. You do, of course, yield no rewards for losing a fight, and you do lose valuable CP, which cannot be restored unless you leave the dungeon and risk having to fight back through the waves unless you have checkpoints unlocked. But compared to the way that other RPGs handle enemy encounters, Tales seems too easy, and that can be a bit condescending. But I still really enjoy the game regardless. There's a lot of player choice, and it's a fun world to mess around in. It's here that Tales has pretty dungeons with plentiful encounters that are replayable and accessible, as any game with great combat should have on offer. But in terms of doing anything particularly unique with the encounters, besides some tough optional fights in the subquests, Tales simply plays it safe, yet satisfying. Most of the subquests are fetch quests, but this is okay because typically all that is asked of the player is to go and find an item to unlock a new recipe, or to go and beat a strong enemy for a reward. These quests are aligned with the core design philosophy of exciting and enriching gameplay, as well as offering some optional, short, self-contained skits that give a glimpse of the lighthearted character moments that aid in developing their rapport further. For a game with a straightforward message about not judging a book for its cover, we can certainly judge Tales of Arise for how it looks. I absolutely adore the art style of Tales of Arise. I love dressing up the characters, especially my pink anime beauty, my queen waifu Shion. I enjoy running as Shion and search for the perfect upskirt shot, which this game obviously endorses through the physics in the photo mode. You can tell how good a game looks and plays, judging by how many captures you have saved after playing it. and I was always stopping to take new screenshots and remark on how aesthetically pleasing and atmospheric the game world is. I love the graphic design of the skits, told through slits and still frames with voiceover. That's a uniquely expressive and artistic way of showcasing the slice-of-life moments that have to be found by exploring and completing tasks. The anime cutscenes, though used sparingly, are about as gorgeous and fantastical as they could be in a game, and they always tease me for a more dramatic, emotional story than the one on the surface. These, along with the backdrops, put Tales of Arise in company with some of the most beautiful anime games and most beautiful games in general ever made. It's not perfect, but on the scale of 1 to Persona 5 Royal, it's a 9 out of 10 for me, and not far from being a 10 if they added more detail to the world environments. I asked the subreddit about this and I got a wide range of responses. I don't like to give a 10 out of 10 score out unless something really goes above and beyond, but Tales arguably almost deserves one because it is absolutely exquisite at times. I suppose also that music adds to the color of the world. It certainly enhances and even creates the immersion in the world, and Tales does have a strong soundtrack, especially some of the battle themes, like the one with the violin, and the opening movie OST, which provides an excellent hook. It's not amazing, but it is certainly a good soundtrack with ambience to approximate the visuals. The stories and characters of anime games are usually written before anyone has begun to type the script. Tales of Arise attempts to be a bit more dramatic and ambitious in its morality tale about how everyone should get along. How if you can talk to people and begin to understand them, you can easily set aside your differences. It's bold for a game like Tales to tackle issues of slavery, both physical and mental, in a climate where people are so fixated on the atrocities of the past to the point of being oblivious to both the perils of the present and the self-imposed turmoil, in spite of the obvious progress we've made as a species. It has a sort of Romeo and Juliet vibe to it, translated to a fantasy setting with magic and sorcery and science fiction. The writing isn't great, but it isn't bad either. There's a lot of memorable lines, actually, in the translated version of the script. There's talk of art filling the soul, of indulgence turning to kitsch, of how sometimes it takes an outsider's eye to help you notice what you've been missing, which to me is the job of the critic, giving perspective to others who might know why, but not know how to put something into words. There is sometimes something more important than the product quality itself, and that is the nature of the perspective from those who prepare and enjoy the product. The characters and the story are silly at times, but it doesn't cross the border into true cringe territory, at least not until near the end when the showdown between the main character and the villain turns into an elongated dick-measuring contest that drags the runtime a bit. The villains themselves aren't anything special in their motivations, although I think the voice work is quite good, especially by Laura Post as Almadria. The same is true for the dubs of the heroes, with Ray Chase, Erica Lindbeck, and some other veterans, both new and old, putting the work in. I especially want to single out Renwell's voice actress, Christine Marie Cabanos, who maximizes her role by being as expressive as possible with every line. There's an intelligent cast of adults and kids with good interplay, and some jokes that get played out, but that's just anime. I obviously would have preferred the focus of the story to be centered on the romance between the two main characters, the swordsman who wields the flaming sword of ambition, sheathed beneath his lady's breasts. It's a really cool concept that doesn't quite meet its potential because of all the runaround. But there are some fan service moments here and there that are enough for me to say that I like the story and the characters. These characters have something to prove to themselves and to the audience about second chances and forgiveness. You can't fault them for having that message when it's always needed. Alphen is the fearless warrior, a man who cannot feel pain as normal, yet takes the burdens of others on his shoulders. Alphen is an interesting character in a predicament that hints at something deeper. His inability to hurt from physical blows makes him relentless, but he hides behind a mask to shield him from the most painful thing of all, the truth of his past and his true nature as a man responsible for the pain of others, for which he himself cannot understand. He has a maiden princess who is beautiful but befuddled by competing desires and responsibilities to the point of maintaining a hopeless and self-defeating outlook. Together they form an interesting dynamic of two people who need one another as keys to unlock their individual potentials. Each character has a unique quirk, Law is naive and oblivious. Kisara is a stern lecturer of sorts, like a mother figure. Dohalim is always going on about random shit. And Renwell is optimistic despite her internal guilt and anger, which is kind of what every character in the story has in common. And each one of them has a potential love link that connects them, which is mostly hinted to us in running gags but never explored further beyond Alphen and Shion in the ending. The main idea of Tales of Arise is that every rose has its thorn, and people are not as black and white as the colors of our skin. Anime has the unique potential to tell serious stories exploring important themes under an art style that is disarming in its cartoonish fantasy aesthetic, presented typically in an over-the-top and melodramatic animation. Yet for these same reasons, anime is one of the most exciting forms of storytelling, because big themes should be played out in big ways, with combat and production values as good and as earnest as Tales of Arise has. It's not too far-fetched to say it has arisen near the peak of the genre, with just a little room left to grow.
Lightning orb! Raging cascade!
Rising water! I'm not done!
Hands in the wind! Air blowing! Where are you going?
You're
Arc
on!
field!
Burn in hell! Swallow dance! Swallow blade! I'll try this!
You see what happened there as you crossed me? Shouldn't have done that.
Not in your dream!
Swallow blade to be serious.
Glacial spear! Pierce!
I'll crush you! Ah! Lightning reflexes! Tenebrous claw!